Imagine living in a world where the emergency line, intended for actual emergencies, is treated like a customer service hotline for people whose brains have temporarily left the building. The kind of world where someone hears a weird noise in their attic and thinks, yep, better call the same number used for heart attacks and house fires. A world where lost remotes, bad haircuts, and mildly inconvenient sandwiches apparently qualify as national crises. And the wild part? These calls really happened. What you're about to hear isn't rock bottom. It's the trapdoor underneath it, and we're about to open it. 1. A woman once called 911 because her cheeseburger wasn't assembled to her emotional standards. Not undercooked, not unsafe, just emotionally disappointing. She claimed the lack of pickles was a threat to her well-being, and honestly, if missing condiments qualify as an existential crisis, we're all one sad sandwich away from calling SWAT. The dispatcher tried explaining that 911 isn't a fast food quality assurance hotline, but she insisted she'd been victimized by lunch. I wish I could tell you she hung up gracefully, but no, she demanded police intervention as if an officer would walk in, salute, and personally reconstruct her burger like it was a hostage negotiation. If this is what counts as an emergency now, civilization is running on fumes. 2. A guy dialed 911 because his cable went out in the middle of a football game. Not a burglary, not a fire, just a blackout of his personal sense of purpose. He claimed it was a national emergency, which is bold considering the nation did not agree. When dispatch told him to call his cable provider, he said, "They're closed. What am I supposed to do?" "I don't know. Read a book, stare at a wall, rediscover hobbies." Apparently none of those were acceptable alternatives. He tried arguing that emotional distress should qualify as a crisis, which is creative. I'll give him that. Imagine firefighters sprinting in, axes ready, only to discover the tragic victim is ESPN. 3. A man called 911 because he saw a suspicious figure in his backyard. Very ominous, very alarming. Except the suspicious figure was the shadow of his own patio umbrella. He'd never seen it at that angle before, which apparently meant it was an intruder from the shadow realm. He whispered dramatically into the phone like he was reporting a spy, describing this unknown entity's posture, which, again, was an umbrella. The officer arrived, spotted the culprit, and the man insisted the shadow had moved earlier. Yes, sir, that's what shadows do. The sun exists. Honestly, at that point, the real emergency was the amount of courage it took for the officer not to laugh directly in his face. 4. A woman dialed 911 because her neighbor's Christmas lights were too joyous and were ruining her inner peace. She claimed the blinking lights were psychological warfare, which is pretty dramatic for a glowing plastic reindeer. She wanted officers to force them to dim their holiday enthusiasm, which is absolutely not in any police training manual. Imagine that body cam footage. Officers negotiating the brightness level of Santa's beard like it's a nuclear disarmament treaty. When told this wasn't a crime, she insisted it should be, for the good of the community. Honestly, the real crime was her commitment to being a seasonal buzzkill. 5. A man called 911 because he got locked inside his own car. And no, not because the doors malfunctioned, because he forgot he could manually unlock them. He sat there in a mild panic, convinced the car was sealing itself, as if it were a sentient metal coffin plotting his demise. Dispatch politely asked, "Have you tried pulling the lock?" And he responded, "You mean, with my hand?" "Yes, sir, with your human hand." He unlocked the door during the call and then said, "Never mind," as if he hadn't just staged his own imaginary kidnapping. Cars have many features. Automatic doors should not be the boss of you. 6. Someone once called 911 because they saw a dead body on the side of the road. Except it wasn't a body. It was a pile of laundry that had tragically fallen out of somebody's trunk. The caller insisted it was definitely a corpse because the shirt looked too still. Right, because laundry is famously active. Police arrived to find a pair of jeans, a hoodie, and a sock, all of whom survived the incident. The caller then said, "Well, it looked human from far away. So do scarecrows, mannequins, and half the people at the DMV. But we're not calling emergency services about it." 7. A woman dialed 911 to report, brace yourself, a dangerous smell coming from her kitchen. She described it as chemical and possibly lethal, and panicked so dramatically you'd think her stove was plotting a coup. Firefighters rushed over, fully geared up, ready for the apocalypse, and discovered the source: a burnt microwave popcorn bag. That's it. The world's least mysterious mystery. She insisted it smelled like poison, which is fair, because burnt popcorn does smell like a surprise from Satan. But still not worth a whole emergency response team. Somewhere out there, a firefighter still tells this story at parties. 8. A man called 911 because his phone battery was dying, and he didn't know what would happen to him once it reached zero. The dispatcher, who probably questioned every life choice that led to that moment, asked what the actual emergency was. He replied, "I won't be able to call for help if something happens." So his emergency was the possibility of a hypothetical emergency. It's a level of paranoia normally reserved for conspiracy theorists and people who refuse to sit with their backs facing the door at restaurants. They told him to plug it in. He said he left his charger at home. And no, they did not deliver him 9. A woman called 911 because her cat looked at her with malicious intent. Not scratched her, not attacked her, just looked. She described the expression as threatening, as if the cat had just said, "Sleep with one eye open." The dispatcher, probably Googling, "Can I quit mid-shift?" in another tab, gently explained that 911 doesn't respond to feline mood swings. She insisted the cat was plotting something strategic. "Ma'am, it's a cat. Its entire strategy is knocking things off counters and shedding on your black clothes. If that's attempted murder, we've all survived several thousand assassination attempts." 10. A man called 911 because the Wi-Fi went out and he needed the police to restore the signal. He claimed it was preventing him from working, which would be fair if he didn't immediately admit that working meant watching conspiracy documentaries on YouTube. The dispatcher said to call his internet provider, and the man said, "They take too long, police respond faster." Yes, because clearly the best use of taxpayer-funded emergency services is rebooting your router. If the founding fathers could see us now, they'd go right back into the ground. 11. Someone once dialed 911 because the sun was too bright and aggressive today. Like it woke up choosing violence. They demanded someone turn it down, as if the dispatcher had a dimmer switch for celestial bodies. The caller insisted the brightness felt targeted, which is a bold claim considering the sun is literally lighting up an entire hemisphere, not just Karen's patio. The officer explained as kindly as possible that weather is not adjustable by law enforcement. Shocking, I know. Imagine being so entitled, you try to file a complaint against a star. 12. A guy called 911 because he couldn't find his favorite socks and believed someone broke in just to steal them. He insisted they were high quality and irreplaceable, which I assume means Costco multi-pack. Police did a welfare check just in case, and, plot twist, the socks were in his dryer. The same dryer he swore he checked 5 times. He apologized, but still insisted. Something weird must have happened. Yeah, it's called laundry. It eats socks. Not a crime, just physics. 13. A woman called 911 because her pizza delivery was taking too long, and she wanted the driver tracked down. She said she feared he'd been kidnapped, which would be touching if she hadn't immediately followed it up with, "Also, it better not be cold when he gets here." So the emergency wasn't his safety. It was cheese temperature. The dispatcher declined to deploy a search and rescue team for a late pepperoni. She hung up muttering about government inefficiency, which is rich coming from someone who tried to treat Domino's like a missing persons report. 14. A man dialed 911 because his roommate ate the last piece of cheesecake, not stole his car, not threatened him, ate dessert. He described it as theft of property, and to be fair, emotional theft is a thing, just not the kind the police handle. He insisted on pressing charges, which is incredible because the roommate didn't deny it. In fact, he said he ate it proudly. The officer told them to handle it like adults, which, based on the call, was wildly optimistic. If cheesecake is all that stands between peace and chaos, we might be doomed. 15. A woman once called 911 because she was trapped in her house. The reason? A squirrel was sitting on her porch, not attacking, just existing. She described it as a hostile squirrel presence, which sounds like a great band name, but not a crime. She refused to leave until animal control arrived, as if the squirrel were a tiny, bushy-tailed mafia boss shaking her down for seed money. The officer eventually walked up, clapped his hands, and the squirrel left. Crisis averted. Humanity remains embarrassing. 16. A man once called 911 because he was being followed by a suspicious vehicle for over 10 miles. Very dramatic, very spy thriller energy. You'd expect a dark SUV with tinted windows, or a beat-up sedan with a villain inside. No, it was the Google Street View car. The one with the giant camera rig on top that looks like a Roomba mated with R2-D2. He thought it was recording his every move, which technically it was. It just wasn't personal. Dispatch tried explaining it was mapping the road, not surveilling him specifically. He refused to believe it, because obviously, if Silicon Valley wants to watch one random man buy gas and miss a highway exit twice, they'll send a technological parade float to do it. 17. A woman dialed 911 because the ice in her drink melted too fast, which she described as suspicious and chemically abnormal. She claimed it must have been tampered with because water doesn't melt that way. I don't know what alternate physics class she attended, but apparently in her universe, frozen water has moral integrity and should remain solid until emotionally ready. The dispatcher, who probably deserved a medal for not hanging up, tried explaining that ice melts because it's ice. That's its whole career. She said, "Well, it never melts that quickly at home. Ma'am, that's because your kitchen isn't exposed to sunlight, friction, and the aggressive heat of your own paranoia." 18. A man once called 911 to report a suspicious noise coming from the sky. You'd think maybe a drone, maybe thunder, maybe the neighbor's kid launching fireworks illegally. No, he insisted it was a hum that sounded like aliens tuning their instruments. He spent 5 minutes describing it with the precision of a man narrating a nature documentary. Officers finally arrived and solved the extraterrestrial mystery. It was a nearby industrial air conditioning unit, a giant metal box making a giant metal noise. When they told him, he nodded like he already suspected that, which is hilarious because he absolutely did not. Look, if aliens ever do show up, I hope they use him as their spokesperson. They deserve it. 19. Someone called 911 to report a woman passed out in her parked car. Very concerning, except she wasn't passed out. She was sleeping after an overnight shift. Sleeping. The caller demanded police break the window because she wasn't moving. The officer knocked lightly. She woke up instantly. The caller looked disappointed, like their chance at being a hero had evaporated. The woman explained she was exhausted from work. The caller said, "Well, how was I supposed to know? She looked dead." "Sir, lots of people look dead when they're napping. That's why naps are peaceful. Not everything is a crime scene. Sometimes people just sleep." 20. A man called 911 because he felt weird after eating 6 edibles. 6, not 1, not half, 6. His emergency wasn't that something was wrong. It was that everything was happening too slowly. He told dispatch, "Time stopped and the carpet is yelling at me." The dispatcher told him to stay calm and drink water, but he kept saying, "Tell the carpet to stop judging me." He asked for an ambulance because he believed he had transcended the human timeline. Paramedics arrived, checked him, and confirmed the diagnosis. He was just extremely high and extremely dramatic, which, to be fair, is the most common combination in 911 edible calls. 21. A woman called 911 because a drive-thru employee gave her the wrong donut, and she demanded law enforcement restore order. She didn't want a refund. She wanted justice. She said the police needed to correct the imbalance of power between customer and corporation. This is the kind of language people use during revolutions, not pastry mix-ups. When dispatch reminded her that donut disputes are not criminal emergencies, she said, "Well, maybe they should be." "Yes, ma'am, let's get Congress on that immediately." The Donut Accountability Act of 2024. Imagine SWAT bursting in over a missing jelly filling. Honestly, I'd watch that show. 22. A man called 911 because he lost his glasses and couldn't see well enough to look for them. He wanted an officer to help locate them using official police methods. Apparently, the official police method was telling him to feel around with his hands. The real punchline? He found them, on his face. He literally located his missing glasses with the body part they were resting on. He apologized, but not before saying, "They didn't feel like my glasses. Sir, what do your glasses feel like? Triumph? Enlightenment?" This man really made emergency services participate in the world's saddest scavenger hunt. 23. A woman called 911 to report a strange man standing suspiciously on her lawn. When officers arrived, the suspicious man was a scarecrow. In her defense, it was wearing a hoodie, which does make it look slightly more menacing, but still, zero movement, zero limbs, zero humanity. She insisted it showed up overnight, which is probably because someone put it there. That's how objects work. When told it was harmless, she said, "Well, it made me feel unsafe. Ma'am, so does my student loan balance. That doesn't make it a police matter. At least the scarecrow was doing its job, which is more than I can say for most lawn dating." 24. A man dialed 911 because his roommate wouldn't stop whistling. Not loudly, not aggressively, just whistling. He described it as psychological harassment, which is honestly impressive creativity. The dispatcher suggested talking to the roommate, and he replied, "I tried. He said it's a free country." Officers arrived to find two grown adults arguing like toddlers. The whistling roommate demonstrated the whistle, which was so soft it barely registered. The complaining roommate said, "See, he's doing it again. Arrest him." The officer recommended earplugs. The man seemed devastated, as if he expected the state to outlaw woodwind-adjacent mouth noises on the spot. 25. A woman called 911 because a raccoon was sitting on her porch chair, like it paid rent. She said the raccoon claimed the property with its energy, which is admittedly a great phrase that I will be stealing. The dispatcher suggested leaving it alone. Raccoons do that. She said, "But it's staring at me like it knows things." Yes, raccoons always look like they're plotting tax fraud. It's part of the brand. Animal control arrived, clapped their hands, and the raccoon left, completely unbothered. She then asked if they could keep an eye on it. "Ma'am, the raccoon is not on parole." 26. A man dialed 911 because his fitness tracker said his heart rate was elevated after climbing stairs. He thought he was dying. He wasn't. He was just out of shape, which, ironically, the fitness tracker was already trying to tell him. He described the feeling as life escaping my body. Meanwhile, paramedics were listening to him breathe like he'd just sprinted from a cheetah. They checked everything. Perfect vitals. The real emergency was that he hadn't done cardio since the Bush administration. They told him to hydrate and maybe try walking occasionally. He looked personally offended, like they'd diagnosed him with laziness. 27. A woman called 911 because the moon looked too close. She said it appeared larger than usual and believed this was a sign of imminent global disaster. The dispatcher explained it was just a supermoon, totally normal. She said, "Well, it's never looked like that before. It has, she just wasn't paying attention because Netflix exists." She begged them to warn the public, as if the moon were planning a hostile takeover of Earth. If the moon ever does attack, I hope she's the one who announces it. She'd deliver it with passion. 28. A man called 911 because he believed his refrigerator was breathing too loudly. He thought it was overheating or transforming, or, based on his description, possibly ascending. The dispatcher asked if it was just running. He said yes, but it sounds more emotional than usual. Officers arrived to a completely fine fridge emitting normal fridge noises. The man said, "Well, it wasn't doing that yesterday." "Sir, appliances are allowed to have moods. Your fridge isn't filing a noise complaint when you breathe weird." 29. A woman called 911 because she thought someone stole her front door. It was open, wide open, as in, she left it open. When officers arrived, she said, "Oh, I might have forgotten to close it." Might have. Just a possibility. She then asked if they could dust it for prints anyway. They explained prints don't matter when you literally didn't close the door. She nodded thoughtfully, like she just discovered gravity. Honestly, anyone who forgets a door exists probably shouldn't be left alone near locking mechanisms. 30. A man dialed 911 to report an intruder in his bathroom. He heard noises. He feared the worst. Officers cleared the house and found the intruder, a Roomba. The man forgot he scheduled it to run at midnight. It had gotten stuck behind the toilet, bumping into it repeatedly like the world's dumbest villain trying to break in. When they told him, he said, "Well, it sounded like a person. Sir, if a criminal breaks into your home and announces themselves using gentle plastic tapping sounds, you're being robbed by a toddler." 31. A woman called 911 because she was trapped in her driveway. The threat? A goose. Not a group of geese. One goose. Standing there. Breathing. Existing. She described it as hostile, which, to be fair, is accurate. Geese are feathered demons. But she wanted officers to escort her to her car like a VIP. They walked up, waved their arms, and the goose left instantly. She said, "See, it was dangerous." "Ma'am, the goose wasn't dangerous. It was annoyed. Probably at having to witness this call. If that goose had thumbs, it would have reported her." After all that, I think it's safe to say the emergency hotline is less a public safety tool and more a confessional booth for people whose brains have temporarily clocked out. If this is the bar for urgent, then humanity is basically held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. Now, do me a favor, drop your vote for the dumbest call in the comments, or tell me the most ridiculous non-emergency you've ever witnessed. And if you survived this tour of chaos, go ahead and like and subscribe. Trust me, it only gets dumber from here.